My name is Richard Lawson. I'm 70 years old, retired, and I used to be a prosecutor for Hennepin County, Minnesota. For over 30 years, I stood in courtrooms and looked men in the eye as I proved, piece by piece, how they planned, executed, and tried to get away with crimes. I learned one thing doing that job. People always think they're smarter than they are, and they always make mistakes. But I never thought, never for a second, that one day I'd be sitting in my own house, listening to my own son plan my death. It was a Tuesday night in November, cold enough outside that the windows hummed when the wind hit them. I was upstairs in my study, same room I'd had for decades, same worn leather chair, same old desk where I used to review case files late into the night. Only difference was, there were no more case files, just silence. My wife, Margaret, had been gone for 2 years by then. Pancreatic cancer. Fast, cruel. Took her before we even had time to understand what was happening. After she passed, the house felt different. Bigger, emptier. Like every room was just waiting. I'd been thinking about selling it, maybe moving somewhere smaller. But I never did. Too many memories in those walls. Too many echoes. That night, I wasn't doing anything special. Just sitting there, going over some old paperwork, trying to keep busy the way men like me do when there's nothing left to chase. And that's when I heard it. At first, it was just noise. Muffled voices drifting up through the old ventilation shaft that runs from the kitchen to my study. I'd discovered years ago, back when Margaret and I renovated the place, that the thing carried sound like a wire. Clear as day if you listened close enough. We used to joke about it, said it was our little secret, a way to catch the kids sneaking cookies past bedtime. Funny how something so harmless can turn into something else entirely. I wasn't even trying to listen at first. But then, I heard my name, and everything in me just stopped. I leaned back in that chair, held my breath, and listened. And I heard her, my daughter-in-law, Olivia. "Your father is a burden, Jason, you know that." Her voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm I'd heard before in interrogation rooms, right before someone said something they could never take back. Then my son spoke. "What do you want me to do?" Just like that. No anger. No shock. No defense. Just acceptance. Like they'd already had this conversation a dozen times before. And then she said something I'll never forget. "Not as long as I live. You know exactly what to do. Take him up to the lake house this weekend, and make it look like he wandered off." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Because I knew exactly what that meant. I'd prosecuted enough cases involving exposure deaths to recognize the setup instantly. Old man. Cold weather. Isolated location. No witnesses. No struggle. Just a tragic accident. Happens all the time, especially in Minnesota winters. People his age get confused, she added. They go out, lose their way. And that's it. Silence followed. The kind that tells you the decision's already been made. And then my son said something that hit harder than anything else that night. "What about the money?" The money. Not me. Not his father. Not the man who raised him, taught him how to ride a bike, sat through every one of his baseball games, helped him through college. Just the money. Olivia didn't hesitate. "If we don't act now, he's going to give it all away. Charity, church, whatever. We'll be left with nothing." I closed my eyes then. Not out of fear, not out of panic, but because something inside me needed a second to understand what I was hearing. This wasn't a moment. This wasn't anger or desperation talking. This was a plan, thought out, discussed, refined. And I knew plans like that don't just disappear. They move forward. I sat there in that chair for a long time after their voices faded. The house went quiet again, like nothing had happened. But everything had changed, because in that moment, I wasn't just a father anymore. I was something else. I was a man sitting at the center of a case. And the suspects were living under my roof. Now, let me tell you something about men like me. When you've spent 3 decades building cases against criminals, you don't panic when you hear a threat. You observe, you analyze, you wait, and most importantly, you let them think they're in control. Because the moment they believe that, that's when they start making mistakes. And mistakes are how you win. I stood up slowly, walked over to the window, and looked out at the dark. Snow had started to fall. First flakes of the season. Quiet. Peaceful. Beautiful even. The kind of night most people would remember for how calm it felt. Me? I remember it as the night I realized my own son had already decided I wasn't going to live through the winter. And the only question left was whether he was going to get away with it. I turned off the light, sat back down at my desk, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt something I hadn't felt since I left the courtroom. Focus. Cold, clear, precise focus. Because what Jason didn't know, what Olivia didn't understand, was that I had spent 32 years putting people in prison for doing exactly what they were planning to do to me. And I knew every step they were going to take before they took it. And that meant one thing. They thought they were planning my death. But what they were really doing was handing me the beginning of a case I was going to win. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't knock on your door and announce itself. It seeps in, quiet, patient, almost polite, and by the time you realize what you're looking at, it's already too late. After that night, after I sat in my study listening to my own son discuss how I might wander off into the cold, I didn't go downstairs. I didn't confront them, because once you show your hand, you lose the game. And I've never been a man who plays to lose. So I did what I've always done. I watched. Now, to understand how we got there, you need to understand who my son used to be. Jason wasn't always this man. There was a time when he was the kind of boy other parents wished they had. I still remember the first time he learned to ride a bike. He must have been 7. Kept falling, scraping his knees, getting back up, over and over again. At one point he looked at me, frustrated, angry, and said, "Don't let go, Dad." And I told him, "I won't." Of course, I did let go. That's how he learned. But I never imagined there would come a day when he'd be the one letting go of me, letting go of everything that made us family. By the time he came back into my life asking for help, that boy was already gone. In his place was a man drowning in debt and standing next to a woman who knew exactly how to use that. Olivia Carter, 36. Beautiful, controlled, and colder than anyone I'd ever put on the stand. The first time she stepped into my house, she didn't see photographs, memories, history. She saw square footage, equity, opportunity. "This place must be worth a fortune," she said. Not hello, not thank you. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. I had seen that look before. Because Jason was my son. And fathers, we have a way of lying to ourselves when it comes to our children. I told myself she didn't mean it that way. That I was being too harsh. That I was seeing ghosts from old cases where there weren't any. That was my mistake. The first month they lived with me, I tried to believe the best in them. Jason said he was looking for work. Olivia filled the house with things that didn't belong there. Expensive decorations, pointless purchases, small luxuries that quietly added up on my accounts. I let it go. Because I thought they just needed time. The second month, Jason stopped trying, and Olivia started talking. Not to me. About me. "It's too much house for one person," she said at dinner one night, like she was discussing the weather. "Must be exhausting at your age." I smiled. "I've managed so far." She smiled back. But her eyes were already measuring the walls, counting something that didn't belong to her. A few days later she tried again. "You know, places like this can be dangerous. One fall, one bad night, and no one would even know." That wasn't concern. That was rehearsal. She wasn't worried about my safety. She was testing the story, seeing how it sounded out loud. And Jason, he just sat there. Quiet, listening, not defending me, not even reacting. That silence, that's what hurt the most. Not what she said, but what he didn't. By the 4th month, I stopped pretending, because that's when the evidence started showing itself. Small things, the kind most people would miss. But I don't miss things like that. My filing cabinet. I always seal it with a small piece of tape. Habit, control, protection. It had been untouched for years. Then suddenly, it wasn't. Once, twice, 3 times, in 2 weeks. Someone was going through my documents. Not randomly, specifically, financial records, property papers, legal files. They weren't curious anymore. They were hunting, and I already knew what they were hunting for. A will, a number, a timeline. A few nights later, I heard Olivia again. Same vent, same calm voice. There has to be a will, she said. We need to know what we're working with before anything happens. Before anything happens. That phrase stayed with me. Because she didn't say if. She said before. Like my death wasn't a possibility. It was a step in a process. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel it. Not anger, not fear. Something heavier, something quieter. Disappointment. Because I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't about bad decisions or desperation. This was about choice. My son had made a choice. And he hadn't chosen me. I sat up slowly, the house silent around me, and looked at the walls that had held our lives for decades. Birthdays, holidays, laughter. Every memory still there. Like nothing had changed. But everything had. Because downstairs, the people moving through my home weren't my family anymore. They were planning something, and I knew exactly what that meant, because I had spent my entire life watching people cross that line. The line where thoughts become plans, and plans become actions, and once that line is crossed, there's no going back. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out into the dark. Snow starting to fall again. Quiet. Still. Beautiful. The kind of night that hides everything. And that's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg my own son to remember who he used to be. Because that man was already gone. What was left was something else. Something I understood far too well. And if they thought they were going to plan my death under my own roof, then they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because they weren't dealing with a helpless old man. They were dealing with someone who had spent 32 years dismantling people exactly like them. And this time, I wasn't just watching anymore. I was building something. Something they would never see coming. There's a moment in every case when you stop asking questions and start building answers. That's where I was now. I didn't need to guess anymore. I didn't need to wonder what Jason and Olivia were thinking. I already knew. What I needed was proof. The kind of proof that doesn't just expose the truth. It locks it in place. So I made 2 calls. The first one was to an old friend, Daniel Reyes, retired FBI. We'd worked together years back on a federal fraud case that turned into something a lot bigger than either of us expected. He was the kind of man who didn't waste words, didn't ask unnecessary questions. When I told him what I'd heard, there was a pause on the line. Not surprise, just calculation. Then he said, "If you're right, they're not going to stop." I knew that already. "Set up surveillance," he added. "Your house, your rules." Minnesota law is very clear about that. One-party consent. If you're part of a conversation, or if it happens inside your home under reasonable suspicion, you can record it. I didn't need him to tell me that, but hearing it from someone I trusted made it official. The second call I made was to my attorney, Laura Bennett. Estate law. Sharp, precise, and discreet. Exactly what I needed. But before I get to that, let me tell you what I did first. I turned my home into a case file. Cameras went in everywhere. Not obvious ones. Small units. Clean installs. Inside smoke detectors. Behind picture frames. Tucked into bookshelves. The kind of placements you'd never notice unless you were looking for them. And even then, you'd probably miss them. The kitchen. The living room. The hallway outside their bedroom. The garage. Every common space. I didn't need coverage in private rooms. I wasn't interested in invading space. I was interested in documenting behavior, patterns, intent. I also placed audio recorders near the vents. That old ventilation system, the one Margaret and I used to joke about. Now it became the most valuable tool I had. Sound traveled through it like a wire. Clean, clear, unfiltered. Within 48 hours, I had my first piece of real evidence. Olivia, standing in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. He's got assets everywhere, she said. 2 properties, investments, pension. We just need to know how it's structured. Not hope, not speculation. Strategy. That was the word I was looking for. Strategy. And strategies leave trails. Over the next few days, I started to see the pattern. Jason, on his laptop late at night, searching things like inheritance timeline Minnesota and Canna will be contested after death. Olivia pacing the kitchen, pushing him. We don't have time to sit around, she said in one recording. He could change everything overnight. Jason hesitated. I could hear it in his voice. Maybe we just talk to him. Ask for help. Alone. Something to get us back on track. There it was. A moment. A chance. A way out. And then Olivia crushed it. Alone? She snapped. Why would we settle for crumbs when the whole thing is sitting right there? Silence. Then Jason said nothing. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. That's when I called Laura back. I need a new will, I told her. A real one. We met in her office 2 days later. Quiet building. Downtown. No one asking questions. I laid everything out clearly. No emotion. Just facts. I wanted 70% of my estate to go to my daughter, Emily. 20% to a veterans support organization. And the remaining 10% to the university law program I'd worked with for years. Jason got nothing. Not $1. I'd already given him more chances than most men ever get. But that wasn't the important part. The important part was what came next. I also need a second document, I said. Laura looked at me. Didn't interrupt. Didn't question. She just waited. A decoy, I added. That got her attention. One that leaves everything. To Jason. She leaned back slightly, studying me. You're expecting someone to find it. I'm counting on it. 3 days later, the decoy will was sitting exactly where it needed to be. In my filing cabinet. Same drawer they'd already opened multiple times. Same place they thought they were being careful. I placed it there myself. Closed the drawer. And sealed it. With the same small piece of tape I'd always used. Then I waited. Not long. 2 days. That's all it took. When I checked the drawer, the tape was broken. Clean. Precis. Someone had opened it and closed it again, thinking they'd left no trace. That night at dinner, Olivia was different. Relaxed, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since she first walked into my house. The kind of smile a person wears when they think they've already won. Jason looked lighter too. Less pressure. Less hesitation. They believed it now. They believed the outcome was already theirs. That the future had been secured. And that's when things changed. Because once people think they've won, they stop being careful. And when they stop being careful, they start making mistakes. Bigger ones. Louder ones. The next week, I watched Olivia go through my medicine cabinet, photographing prescription bottles, labels, dosage. She didn't know the camera above her was capturing every second of it. Jason. He stopped pretending altogether. No more job searching. No more interviews. Just late nights, quiet conversations, and a growing sense of urgency between them. We can't wait forever, Olivia said one night. He's 70, not 90. This could drag on for years. Jason rubbed his face, frustrated. This is my father. And there it was again. Another moment, another chance. And again. She crushed it. And this is our future, she said coldly. Which one matters more? I listened to that recording twice, then a third time. Not because I needed to hear it again, but because I wanted to be absolutely certain. There was no misunderstanding, no gray area, no doubt left. This wasn't desperation anymore. This wasn't financial stress pushing them to the edge. This was intent, clear, calculated, growing stronger by the day. And then, they made their next move. And that's when I knew we were past the point of no return, because they stopped talking about money and started talking about timing, about location, about how it would happen. And once that line is crossed, there's no going back. That night, I sat alone in my study. Lights off, just the glow of the screen in front of me, replaying everything I'd recorded over the past weeks. Piece by piece, it all fit together. Motive, opportunity, planning, the same structure I'd built hundreds of cases on. Only this time, I wasn't sitting at a prosecutor's table. I was sitting in my own home, watching my own son become the kind of man I used to put behind bars. I took off my glasses, rubbed my eyes, and let out a slow breath, because I knew what came next. They were going to escalate. They always do. It's the nature of people who think they're getting close to something they want. They push harder, move faster, take bigger risks, and that's when they expose everything. I leaned back in my chair, staring into the dark, and for the first time since this began, I allowed myself to think one step further ahead. Not about what they were planning, but about how it would end. Because now, I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was setting a stage, a place where everything they thought they controlled would collapse all at once. And when that moment came, I wouldn't be reacting. I'd be ready, because they believed they were building a plan to take my life. But what they didn't realize was that every step they took was bringing them closer to something else entirely. A trap they had already walked into. There's a certain kind of silence that only comes right before something irreversible happens. I've felt it before. In courtrooms, in interrogation rooms, in the seconds before a witness tells the truth, or a suspect makes a mistake they can't take back. That same silence followed me all the way to the lake house. It was Jason's idea. Of course it was. Friday morning, he walked into the kitchen with a smile I hadn't seen in months. Relaxed, easy, almost nostalgic. "Hey, Dad," he said, pouring himself coffee like everything was normal. "What do you say we head up to the lake this weekend? Just you and me. Like old times. Like old times." Funny how people reach for memories when they're about to destroy them. I looked at him over the rim of my mug, studied his face. The same face I used to see at the breakfast table every morning when he was a kid. Same eyes, same voice, different man. "That sounds good," I said. And I meant it. Not for the reasons he thought, but because everything was finally in place. You see, while Jason and Olivia were busy planning, I had already moved ahead. The cameras at the lake house were installed weeks earlier. Daniel was staying in a cabin less than a mile down the road, quiet, out of sight, watching. And my attorney, she had everything she needed secured where no one could touch it. This wasn't a risk anymore. It was a controlled environment. We drove up that afternoon, 2 hours of road stretching out ahead of us. Jason talked the whole way. Sports, restaurants, weather. The kind of empty conversation people use to fill space when they don't want to think too hard about what's coming. I let him talk, nodded when it made sense, answered when necessary, but most of the time, I just listened, because I knew this might be the last normal conversation we ever had. We reached the lake house just before 4. The sky was already turning gray, snow coming down steady, wind cutting across the water like a blade. 15 degrees, maybe lower with the wind chill, the kind of cold that doesn't forgive mistakes. Inside, the house felt exactly the same as it always had. Warm, quiet, familiar. The smell of old wood and coffee lingering in the air. Margaret loved this place, said it was the only place where time seemed to slow down. That night, time didn't slow down. It sharpened. I cooked dinner. Fish I'd brought from the city. Rice. Vegetables. Simple. Routine. Jason opened a bottle of wine. We sat at the table, same one Margaret and I bought decades ago, and for a while, It almost felt real. He told stories, laughed, talked about college, about things I hadn't heard him mention in years. And for a brief moment, I saw him again, the son I remembered. And that was the hardest part. Knowing that underneath all of this, there had once been something good. But I didn't let that thought stay long, because I knew what was coming next. After dinner, Jason stood up and stretched. "I'll make coffee," he said. Casual. Easy. Like it was nothing. I nodded. "Sounds good." He walked into the kitchen, and I watched him. Through my phone. The camera angle was perfect. Clear view of the counter, the cabinet, his hands. I saw him reach into his jacket pocket. Saw him pull out a small plastic bag. White powder inside. No hesitation, no second thoughts. He poured it into one of the mugs, stirred it slowly, carefully, like he'd done it before. Then he brought both cups into the living room. Set one down in front of me. "To the weekend," he said, raising his cup slightly. I raised mine, brought it close to my lips. But I didn't drink. Not a drop. 32 years in courtrooms teaches you something simple. Never trust what you didn't prepare yourself. We sat there for a while, talking, waiting, Jason watching me in a way he thought I wouldn't notice. Measuring time, counting minutes, waiting for the drug to do its work. After about 20 minutes, he stood up. "I'm gonna hit the bathroom," he said. "Be right back." I nodded again. Same calm, same rhythm. The moment he disappeared down the hall, I moved. Fast, quiet. I poured the coffee into a thermal container I'd hidden behind the couch earlier. Evidence. Then, I refilled the mug from the pot. Same level. Same color. Same appearance. When Jason came back, nothing had changed. At least not from his perspective. I leaned back in my chair, let out a slow breath, and stretched. "Think I'm gonna turn in early," I said. That wine hit me harder than I expected. He smiled. That same easy smile. But his eyes, they were empty. Watching, calculating. "Yeah," he said. "Get some rest." I went to my room, closed the door, locked it, and waited. 10:40. The house was quiet. 11:15. Still nothing. 11:40. Footsteps. Soft. Careful. Coming down the hall. The handle turned. Once. Twice. Locked. A pause. Then silence. Footsteps moving away. 10 minutes later, they came back. This time, there was a sound. Metal against metal. Slow. Deliberate. A butter knife, probably. Working the lock. It gave after a few seconds. The door opened. Through the camera, I watched him step inside. My son, standing at the edge of the bed, looking down at what he believed was me. I had arranged the pillows carefully. Shape, weight, covered with blankets just enough to look real in low light. He stood there for a full minute, not moving, just looking. Then he leaned down, pressed 2 fingers against the pillow where my neck should have been, checking for a pulse, making sure. Satisfied. He straightened up, nodded to himself, and got to work. He dressed the shape in my coat, my boots, wrapped it tight, lifted it, struggled a little with the weight, and carried it out through the back door, loaded it into the car, and drove. I tracked him the entire way. GPS device I'd placed under his bumper 3 weeks earlier. He drove exactly where I expected. A remote access road near the lake. No lights. No cameras. No signal. He stopped. And then, nothing. 11 minutes. No movement. That's how long it took him to realize the truth. That what he had in the back seat wasn't his father. When he came back, everything was ready. Lights on. Front porch lit up against the snow. And I was standing there, waiting. Coat on. Coffee in my hand. Clean. Untouched. Daniel stood beside me. 2 officers just behind him. Jason pulled into the driveway slowly. The car stopped. And for a moment, he didn't move. I could see his face through the windshield. pale, empty, like something inside him had just collapsed. He stepped out of the car. Dad. That was all he managed. Just that one word. I set the cup down, took a step forward. You thought I drank the coffee, I said. Calm, clear. You thought I was unconscious. You wrapped what you believed was my body and drove it out into the cold. He shook his head slightly, like he was trying to wake up from something. I can explain. No, I cut in. You can't. I stepped closer, close enough that he couldn't look away. I have everything, Jason. The kitchen, the hallway, the recordings, the conversations, the plan. Daniel moved forward then. Jason Lawson, he said firmly. You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and theft. Jason didn't resist, didn't run, didn't argue. He just stood there, staring at me. And in that moment, I saw it. Not anger, not fear, recognition. The exact moment he understood something criminals always realize. Just a little too late. He had never been in control. They took him away in silence. The car disappeared down the road, red lights fading into the snow, and I stood there, on that porch, listening to the wind move across the lake, because the plan had worked. Every step, every detail. But as I turned back toward the house, I knew something else was coming. Because Jason wasn't the only one involved. And what happened next was going to bring everything into the open. There are moments in life when everything becomes clear at once. Not gradually, not over time, all at once, like a light turning on in a dark room. The trial was one of those moments. I had spent 32 years in that courthouse, walked those halls, stood in front of juries, watched men try to explain the unexplainable, but nothing prepares you for sitting there and watching your own son become one of them. They brought Olivia in first, calm as ever, composed, like she was still in control, like this was just another situation she could talk her way out of. Jason came in after, and for the first time, he looked exactly like what he was. Not confident, not charming, just small. The prosecution didn't need to say much. They didn't need to build drama. They just showed the truth. Video after video, recording after recording. Their voices, clear, cold, calculating, talking about my life like it was an inconvenience that needed to be solved. And then came the moment that broke whatever was left of him. One of the recordings. His voice, hesitating. He's my father. And then hers. Sharp. Final. He's not your father anymore. He's money. And if you don't take it, someone else will. The room went quiet. And Jason, he lowered his head, because that was the moment, the exact moment he chose. Not me. Not family. Not anything we had built over a lifetime. He chose money. And choices have consequences. The verdict didn't surprise me. It never does when the evidence is that clear. Guilty. One word, repeated again, and again, and again. Each time, heavier than the last. Jason didn't look at me when it was read. Olivia did. For just a second. And in her eyes, I didn't see fear. I saw anger. Because, for the first time, something hadn't gone her way. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. 20 years each. Same punishment. Same outcome. No difference between the one who planned it and the one who carried it out. Because in the end, it doesn't matter who started it. It matters who followed through. When they brought Jason past me, he stopped. Just for a second. And I saw it. Regret. Real regret. Not the kind you fake in court. The kind that comes too late to matter. Dad, he said. And for a moment, just a moment, I heard that boy again. The one who used to run into the house after school. The one who used to ask me to stay a little longer when I tucked him in at night. The one who once told me, I'll take care of you when you're old. But that moment passed. Because I remembered something else. The coffee. The plan. The drive into the cold. I'm selling everything, I said. His head snapped up. What? The house. The lake. All of it. I stepped closer, not angry, not loud, just clear. Every dollar you were willing to kill me for will never belong to you. His face changed. Not fear, not regret, loss. That's my inheritance, he said. I shook my head slowly. No, I held his gaze. Made sure he understood every word. You didn't lose your inheritance today. I paused. Just long enough. You buried it the night you chose money over me. He broke then. Not completely. But enough. Dad, please. But there are things in life that don't come back once they're gone. Trust is one of them. I turned and walked away. And this time, I didn't feel anything pulling me back. Not guilt, not hesitation. Just certainty. I sold everything within 2 months. The lake house. The main house. Every piece of a life they thought they could take from me. And I gave it away. 1 million to protect people like me. 1 million to make sure others don't end up sitting in their own homes, listening to their own children plan their deaths. And the rest, to the only person who never once saw me as anything other than her father, my daughter. Because she never asked. And sometimes, the people who ask for nothing are the only ones who deserve everything. Life is quieter now. Smaller. Simpler. I sit on my porch most evenings, watching the sun go down with a cup of coffee in my hand. Clean. Safe. Mine. And sometimes, I think about that night. The vent. The voices. The moment everything changed. Not with anger. Not with regret. Just understanding. Because in the end, this was never really about money. It was about something much simpler. Something I've seen destroy men over and over again. Greed. The kind that makes you forget who you're dealing with. The kind that makes you believe you can take something without consequences. My son made that mistake. He looked at me and saw an old man, weak, alone, easy. He forgot who I was. He forgot what I had spent my entire life doing. And more than that, he forgot one simple truth. The person you underestimate is usually the one who ends the game. And in his case, he didn't just lose the money. He didn't just lose his freedom. He lost something far more valuable than anything he was trying to take. He lost the right to ever call me his father again.